My name is Andy Kahan. I'm the Director of Victim Services, Victim Advocacy, Crime Stoppers of Houston. I've been a victim advocate now for 30 some odd years. Graduated from the University of Houston. I was in the mayor's office for 18 years and somehow survived a bunch of different mayors. Then I went over to Houston Police Department and I've been with Crime Stoppers for over 4 years. Anybody here from New York? What part?
Queens.
Okay, cool.
AOC was my councilwoman, whatever. It's a horror show.
Yeah, it is. Okay, I grew up in and around New York City, so I don't stand still and talk, because what happens if you stand still and talk in New York City? You get run over, right? So I'm not going to stand, we'll be walking around talking, I might hit a ceiling tile or two on all that good stuff. In my spare time, I've been a high school basketball referee for 28 years. More importantly, I've never missed a call, which is truly amazing. So, let's get into what's happening now in Harris County and Houston, what we've been seeing at Crime Stoppers, and all that good stuff. So we're going to have a discussion. Anytime you have questions, wherever, just feel free and further. So how many people know what Crime Stoppers is? All right, everybody's pretty familiar. We're the big tip line, right? Everybody calls. Did anybody ever have any idea how Crime Stoppers got started? It's actually a pretty cool story. It was a police officer in 1978 from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he was frustrated and ticked off that he couldn't get this crime solved. And he went public. He did a news segment asking for the public's help. And guess what? Public help. Got the crime solved. And so he figured, you know what? Did this once, it'll work again. And that's kind of how it snowballed. In Harris County, in Houston, we have the largest Crime Stoppers in the country. We're the only Crime Stoppers in the country that has its own office. We're the only Crime Stoppers that has different unique programs like mine. So we're about as big and as good as it gets in the country. We have solved over 35,000 felons, including thousands of murders, capital murders, aggravated robberies, and so forth. We've given out over $1 billion worth of tips. We are a nonprofit. We are not government. We are not law enforcement, though many people assume that we are part of law enforcement. Obviously, we work very closely with law enforcement, but we are not a government or a law enforcement entity. Therefore, we rely strictly on donations, fundraisers. We used to get a lot of court costs from judges. That has tapered off about 80% with what's going on down at the courthouse as well. So we go into schools. We're in every single school in Harris County and adjoining counties. We're responsible, our tips in the schools have been responsible for removing over 200 weapons in schools. And again, all calls to Crime Stoppers are anonymous. Our third floor is staffed by law enforcement. They're the ones who take the calls. We have no idea who you are. And to show you how truly anonymous Crime Stoppers is, when I get people calling me and they leave messages, a lot of times they'll ask me to call back and they don't put their phone number down because they assume I have caller ID. We actually did a news segment with one of the stations showing when you call what lights up on the phone. So if you do end up calling me, I would strongly urge you to leave your phone number so I can give you a call back on that as well. So, what's happening right now in Harris County? I've been doing this 30 some odd years, and I frankly have not seen what I'm seeing involving the crime rate and what's happening at the courthouse, and I've seen it all, I've been through it all. I've done 27 pieces of legislation to enhance victims' rights and public safety, but what we are seeing is extremely disturbing at Crime Stoppers. If anybody watches local Fox News, every Tuesday we do a segment called Breaking Bond. I would certainly encourage you to go back and look at that. Quite frankly, I can do this every day if I wanted to do that. Individuals who've been released on felony bonds charged with additional crimes have doubled since 2018. What used to be unheard of was offenders charged with violent crimes getting what's called a PR bond. Anybody know what a PR bond is? personal recognizance bond, which is basically a get out of jail free card. So before I proceed any further into talking about the issue of bond, just for my own information here, is there anybody here currently on bond? I'll make assumptions. I don't know. All right, good. Anybody here who should be on bond? That's a better question. Me too. Anybody here currently wearing an ankle monitor? All right, let me make sure mine is turned on. All right, good, so I can prove where I am. All right, here, so we're gonna get into what's going on right now at what we call the revolving door at the courthouse in Harris County. There were, in 2018, there were 12 defendants who were given PR bonds charged with violent offenses. 2021, we managed to improve that to 1,283. We're talking murder, ag robbery, ag assault with a deadly weapon. We're talking about some serious offenses that essentially are told to please return to court and behave yourself and don't reoffend again. Capital murder is the only offense in which a defendant can actually be given no bond. And that used to happen quite regularly. And how we know that happened quite regularly is because I've been doing local media for 30 years, and the reporters that I work with, we all say, have we ever done stories on guys getting out on bond on capital murder? And we look at each other and we go, no. But we are now. There are over 110 defendants charged with capital murder who are out on bond in Harris County. Of those, 4 have subsequently been charged with additional murders as well. So what I started doing is documenting offenders charged with murder in Harris County. I'm going to ask you to help me up here for a second. And I started noticing a trend. And I started noticing, I'll just leave this up here. We started noticing that a lot of defendants who were charged with murder in Harris County had been released on multiple felony bonds. That's more than one felony bond. Or they were on a felony PR bond. Or they were on bond and they forfeited their bond and just decided they weren't going to show up in court. To date, I have 181 people who've been murdered, albeit allegedly, though some have now been convicted by a defendant fitting that category. So for example, if you were out on one bond and you were charged with murder, you didn't make that list because it was just one bond. It had to be more than one, or you got to get out of jail free card, or you were on bond and forfeited your bond and became a fugitive. Of that 181, 140 plus since 2020. 19 were domestic violence victims, including 3 unborn children. A majority of the victims were people that you would want to classify as minorities or people of color, but there seems to be little, if any, outrage what happens with that. So we started putting this stuff together because we started noticing this trend. Last legislative session, 2021, we had several bills to address this situation. One of them was called the Damon Allen Act, and that was based on a trooper that was shot and killed by a defendant out on multiple felony bonds. Now, if you keep up with the legislative sessions, you'll know last session was quite interesting because we had a bunch of delegates that decided they were going to take a sabbatical and go to DC and all sorts of very interesting stuff. We had a bill filed that basically would have eliminated defendants charged with certain violent crimes from getting a PR bond. Now, I respect the opposition, and I'm going to tell you why I respect the opposition, because they are well organized, they're funded, and they show up in droves. And to show you a great example, when we went up to testify in support of that bill, there were 10 of us there supporting it, 7 from Crime Stoppers. They had over 80 people testifying against it. They show up, they participate, and I respect the living heck out of doing that, even though we disagree with the issues. We did finally get it passed, so sorry to tell you, if you were thinking about committing a murder, you're not going to get a get out of jail free card anymore. But what didn't pass was more disturbing, and that was a constitutional amendment which would have allowed you, the Texas voters, to decide whether or not judges should have discretion, and that's a key word, discretion, not to grant bond to defendants charged with certain violent crimes. I saw zero downside in doing this. It's simply discretion, and a great example of that is what happened in Paul Castro's case. And Paul, you might recall, they were leaving the Houston Astros game last summer, and the son was shot and killed in what's called a road rage murder. And when the judge gave him a bond, which he did make, there were a lot of people ticked off. And they had every right to be ticked off. The bottom line was, because of the way the statute reads, the only offense in which a judge can't give a bond for is capital murder. So this bill would have allowed you, the voters, to decide whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. Passed the Senate 27-2, went over to the House, and because it's a constitutional amendment, it's not a simple majority. It means you have to have 2/3 of the members that vote for it. We fell 12 votes short of allowing you, the voter, to decide whether this was a good thing to give judges discretion or not. And to be brutally, bluntly honest with you, every single representative of the Harris County Democrat state representative delegation voted against it. Not one of them wanted to give you, the voter, which to me was kind of a form of voter suppression, but that's just me because they didn't want you to vote whether this was a good bill or a bad bill. So we have to come back again next session and try to get this pushed. During the session, Harris County District Attorney's Office testified in favor of the bill, and they presented documentation and data supporting why we needed it. Harris County District Attorney's Office testified in favor of it. Harris County Commissioner's Court sent someone up there to testify against it. And the person they sent up there against it, his Twitter feed's opening statements that abolished prisons. That was the first time in my 30 years I've ever seen two governmental entities actually disagreeing or testifying one for or one against on a piece of legislation. Normally you're in sync when you're looking at legislation, but this time you had opposing views, and you, the taxpayer, sent someone up representing the Commissioner's Court to testify against it. Once we found out about his social media feed, we put it out there, and somehow he's no longer employed there, but I don't know how that works, but that's just interesting things how this happened. So we decided we would put names, faces, and pictures to individuals like this. Because I could say 181 all day long. But when we start talking about the cases, and I'll talk about a few of them. Rosalie Cook right here, an 80-year-old grandma who's going to Walgreens on a Saturday morning in Meyerland, and she stumbled upon a guy named Randy Lewis. Randy Lewis had over 60 convictions in Harris County. I don't know what he had elsewhere. He was out on not one but 2 felony PR bonds, despite having over 60 convictions. He was told to go live in a facility as a condition of his bond, which he did for a day. And then he walked out, and nobody did anything. Nobody reported it. Nobody told the court, hey, this guy is gone. We might want to put like a warrant out for his arrest. For 2 weeks, Randy Lewis' whereabouts were unknown. He stumbles upon Rosalie Cook coming into the parking lot, tries to carjack her, stabs her to death in the parking lot at 10 a.m. in Walgreens. Rosalie Cook paid the price for discretionary felony bond reform. Martha Medina, coming out of McDonald's, you might remember her case. She was followed from a bank, coming in, going to McDonald's, getting her breakfast, walks out. 2 guys tried to carjack her and killed her. One of the guys charged with her murder was on bond for capital murder. already. Martha Medina paid the price for this. Chi Lee, whose body was found stuffed in a freezer off of the Beltway in Hammerley, the individual charged in her murder was on two bonds for violating a protective order and family assault. I could go on and on and on talking about some of these cases here. Anybody here watch local Fox News in the morning? Anybody here watch local Fox News? All right, so I'm going to show you this one right here. If you watch local Fox News in the morning, weathermen, and I can say weatherman here, right? I don't have to say weather person, do I? I don't have to say whether he, she. I can say that. If you want to complain, you can complain. But I'm going to call him a weatherman, okay?
We're not confused.
Okay. I've actually been called out for that. So again, I don't make assumptions here. All right, so I feel comfortable in calling Mike Iskovich a weatherman. If you watch Fox News in the morning and in the afternoon, he is their chief meteorologist. This is Mike Iskovich's dad, Stanley. Stanley's an 80-year-old Air Force veteran who was just simply taking a walk in his neighborhood. He was murdered by a guy out on a felony PR bond. You would think maybe that's kind of like the end of the story, right? Now he's charged with murder, right? Guess what? He's back out on a bond. And there are over dozens to over 20 some odd individuals on these poster boards charged with murder despite being out on multiple felony bonds who are back out on bond as well. We did a story here. Let's see if I can find her picture here. One of the stories we did that ended up on local news had to do with Summer Chester. Jonathan Lira was booked and charged with capital murder, shot and killed a 55-year-old homeowner in his sleep during a home invasion in the Greens Point area. And he shot another person that was trying to flee the scene. Vera was booked, charged with capital murder, was given a $250,000 bond, which he couldn't make. So for several years, he was actually in the county jail where he belonged. While in the county jail, he was charged with assault of a public servant when he decided to do several things to one of the officers. One of them involved saliva and a few other things as well. So now he's charged with another felony, okay? He also racked up 90 pages worth of infractions while behind bars, which kind of, in my experience, that kind of leads you to the conclusion that he's not exactly behaving himself to do that, but, what do I know? So, this particular court ignored all that and lowered his capital murder bond from 250 to 50. He makes the 50, he gets out, despite, again, being charged with another felony while in custody and 90 pages worth of infractions. 6 months later, he's speeding, runs a red light, kills Summer Chester, 23-year-old TSU graduate student. Summer Chester paid the price for that. I will go to my dying grave arguing that that decision cost her her life. And that's what we're seeing over and over and over again. Any comments, questions? Yes, sir.
I understand everything you're saying. Who's the guilty party? Is it Lynn Hidalgo? Is it Ken Hogg? Is it the district attorney? Is it the Democratic Party?
Shortcut judges.
Why is this happening? Why is nobody being held accountable?
Well, you have that opportunity to hold people accountable, don't you? You elect them. You do. Buck stops with the courts. Buck stops with the judges. I can tell you in all the cases that I've researched, the district attorney's office has asked for either no bond or an extremely high bond. They've filed motion to revoke bonds, all ignored. What was very unusual last election cycle during the primaries, normally if you're an incumbent judge, you pretty much get a free ticket or a free ride to the general election. You're not challenged. A majority of the judges actually had primary opponents in the Democrat Party, which is really unusual. And at least 6 or 7 of them were voted out in a primary. To me, that says a lot. So this upcoming election cycle, you're going to see an emphasis on judicial races like you've never seen before. And you're going to see an emphasis on that because every single court that's coming up for re-election has an opponent one way or the other. So you make that ultimate decision. As I tell people, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, but I am here to let you know that if you like the way things are going, you have that opportunity to keep things the way they're going. If you don't like the way things are going, you have an opportunity to make a change. So I would urge everybody to get educated in the judicial races because that's what's mattered and that's what's happening in what we call a revolving door at the courthouse. So these people paid the price for decisions that we hadn't seen. Yes, ma'am.
You had asked about comments. My grandson is he's first year rookie with the HPD. And he's frustrated because of the way things are going, but he said, you know, when he's going to collar somebody, he's going to arrest somebody and they're struggling and they're fighting, he says, why are you struggling and fighting me? You're going to be out before I even finish my paperwork. And he said, May, calm down. He said, it's a joke. You're in Harris County and this is what's going to happen. Yep. And so, but yes, it is the judges, and our Harris County Republican Party has worked very hard to make sure that every single one of those Democrat seats were challenged. And so I'm preaching to the choir here because y'all all know this, but it's our job, it's our responsibility to get out and tell our neighbors, our friends, our family, all of those people we care about, tell them, vote all the way down the ballot. We've all talked to people who said, well, I don't know who that is. I've never heard that name before. It doesn't matter. If there's an R next to their name, which is the first name in every position all the way down the ballot, it's a Republican. Vote for that person if you really and truly are committed to making a difference in Harris County. Vote all the way down the ballot to the very end.
Well, this upcoming election cycle, from my perspective, will make us or break us. It's that simple. But you're the one who will make that call, not me. Yes, sir.
Yeah, a lot of the liberals and the judges, what they use is a lot of social issues to make excuses for these criminals. And that's what they keep pounding all the time. It's always an excuse what they do.
Well, the criminals basically have become the victims.
Right, and we have to stand up to that and just tell them, hell no, and do what needs to be done to keep these criminals in jail, no bond, okay? And we have to start making an example of some of these criminals to give this way as a deterrent to keep doing crime.
Yeah, you get no argument from me. Yes, sir.
Yes, and early on in this current county commissioner tenure, there was a litigation that was going on about bonds. And one of the commissioners convinced the incumbent judge to settle a bond for several $1 million. That's the genesis of this whole thing?
The genesis was what's called the O'Donnell decision, which was a federal court decision, and that dealt with misdemeanor bonds. And quite frankly, we had no problem with that. We didn't care about low-level offenders. And we actually supported misdemeanor bond reform. It didn't. What happened was, though, the federal court order that the misdemeanor judges over kind of spilled over to the felony courts. Even though they're not under a court order, they've kind of taken it upon themselves to implement the same practices that are being done on the lower level offenders, even though they're not, and that's why we call it discretionary felony bond reform, because you're not under in order to do that. So that's kind of where the difference was on this as well.
In a comment, when I was in college in the 70s, I don't know how old I am, one of my jobs during college was called a pretrial release program.
Yep.
And, you know, you're in college, you're a little bit looking away, right? But what our program was kind of a check mark system, if you will. We would interview, we look at the booking sheets every day, and we would focus on simple burglaries, little quasi misdemeanors, and we would do interviews, check the sheets, and then we go see the district judge and put recommendation or not recommendation. Then we had the obligation to follow that up and get back to the judge if this person is not following. The only one we ever had lost during that program was a DWI. We realized don't do DWIs anymore. And it was effective. It did effectively what they were trying to do, not keep people from smoking a joint in jail for 6 years. You know, and so there is precedence of doing this. I mean, Andy, you've been around.
Yeah, you're dealing with a different mindset. You're dealing with what's called criminal justice reform, and some of it was good. Make no bones about it. But it's kind of done like a roller coaster and has gone way, way on the other side where it was actually intended to do this for. You know, some of the examples are what's happening with the catalytic theft converter rings. There was a big story not even a month ago where all the feds and local law enforcement busted this huge ring, which I thought was great. All right, so and a week later I said, well, let's see what's happened with the 5 defendants that was on the news every night. All of them are back out on bond. One of them's actually on parole. Now, I'm going, wait a second, you're on parole, you're charged with engaging in organized criminal activity, and you're allowed to make a bond. Wow, that's just beyond, but that's what you're seeing here. And because catalytic theft is classified as a, quote, non-violent crime, right? Because it didn't, but even though we know that in many cases that will often lead to violent crime, because you had a Harris County sheriff's deputy that was murdered while trying to stop a catalytic theft converter. That will probably be one of the issues that will be coming up next legislative session. And I'm going to tell you what we're doing at Crime Stoppers, and this will actually be released publicly next week. We've instituted a research center because I did all this on my own. This was just little old me doing this because I noticed a trend. But we naturally have now been funded, and we have a research center that is taking a look at other offenses besides murder. And that includes ag assault with a deadly weapon, that includes human trafficking, sexual assault, and it also includes an issue that you're probably going to hear a lot talked about soon, and that's called felon in possession of a weapon, gun. Guns are on everybody's talking point right now, right? Gun safety, gun violence, right? What can we do about it? Nobody's talking about what we're about to talk about publicly next week, and that is known felons who by law are not supposed to be carrying and owning a firearm, right? And we are seeing hundreds and hundreds of defendants charged with what's called felon in possession of a weapon being released on personal recognizance bonds. So and you notice that nobody who's a proponent of gun safety will touch this issue, but we're about to bring it to them. Because if you're truly wanting to do something about gun proliferation and the amount of guns in the community, this is an issue you should be behind. So it's going to be very interesting to see who is going to be supporting the initiative that we're doing. And I do believe that you will see that issue again brought up next legislative session. That was not one of the offenses that was designated to eliminate PR bonds for. And it's my understanding through talking with several senators that we will be bringing that up this upcoming legislative session. So if you're truly concerned about gun safety, you should also be concerned about how many offenders we put back to the community charged with felon in possession of a firearm. That to me is pretty disturbing because we already know who you are, and you've already demonstrated that you shouldn't be owning or carrying a firearm, but we put you right back out in the community. So that's another one that we're looking at right now. So there's a lot going on at Crime Stoppers. We're putting on an event it's in mid-October, but if you go to our website, you'll see all the different events that we do. I use social media almost every day to put these issues out. So look at Crime Stoppers on social media, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Look at myself, because this is how I engage with the public. It's easier for me to put this stuff out to the general. We're going to be doing a seminar workshop on legislation, because people know, how do we don't know. Most people do not know. And sadly, most people have no clue as to who their state representatives or state senators are. I was doing a presentation a few months ago to a group of millennials, and that's people under 30. None of them had my hairstyle or any of that good stuff. There were about 60 people there, and God bless them, that's a pretty good show up. And I asked them a very simple question. Who's your state representative? Who's your state senator? Not one of them could answer that question. One of them, young girl, goes, Ted Cruz? Nope. Another one said, Lizzie Fletcher? And I said, no offense, but you just proved my point. You have no earthly idea of what's going on or who you pay to represent your interests at the state capitol. I said, I encourage you, find out who your state rep, and it's everywhere I go, I ask these questions. And most of the time, I'll get a few answers, but most of the time people go, I don't know. You should. You should know who, if you're living in the city of Houston, you should know who your councilman. If you're living in the county, you need to know who your commissioner is. They're the ones who you pay. You're the ones who pay their salary to determine what issues should be discussed, what issues they should be for, and what issues they should be against. So that's, pretty much what's going on right now. I serve on the board of Parents of Murdered Children and Surviving Family Members of Homicide, which is the only organization in the country in which someone else writes out your membership for you. I've been with this organization as part of a national group for 30 years. We meet the second Tuesday at Crime Stoppers from 7 to 9 p.m. Everyone's invited to come and attend and support homicide survivors. And I want to say, within the last year or so, I've never seen attendance so high, which is sad. We used to be able to do this in a 2-hour block, 7 to 9. We can't even get done at 9 o'clock because there's too many people that are there. Our next big event, and again, everyone is invited to attend, we have what's called the National Day of Remembrance, which is to commemorate and honor all homicide victims and surviving family members of homicide. This is done throughout the nation. It was actually adopted by Congress in 2007. We put on a very robust event. It will be September 25th, which is a Sunday. It will be from 6 to 8 p.m. at Crime Stoppers. And we will have slides, screens of homicide victims, families will be there with pictures, usually elected officials. I expect a lot more people to attend because it is an election season as well. But if you want to help and support homicide survivors, I would encourage you to attend and do that. So again, my staff consists of me. We get along real well.